In the quiet hours before dawn, the Caribbean Sea looked calm and untouched, as a small boat drifted through dark water believing it had survived another dangerous night. But high above, in a silent command room, Pete Hegseth watched glowing screens and gave an order that no one on that boat would live. The first strike tore through the vessel in a flash of fire and chaos, leaving 2 men alive in the water with burned hands raised in surrender. And in a moment of dramatic irony, the world remained blind while Hegseth appeared on television, claiming the mission was clean and lawful, until a sleepless naval officer broke under the weight of what he had seen and leaked the footage that showed the survivors and the second deadly strike. And with that single act of truth, the power shifted from secrecy to exposure. As protests spread, allies turned silent, and the once untouchable man was dragged into a courtroom where the same footage played not as classified material but as evidence. And when the verdict came, there were no cheers, only a quiet release because justice had finally surfaced, leaving behind a lesson carved deeper than any weapon ever could, that power built on lies always collapses. Darkness never hides truth forever, and no matter how powerful a man becomes, the truth will always rise higher. In the days after the leaked footage shook the world, people believed the story was over. They believed justice had been served and the truth had finally won. But behind locked doors, a darker truth was beginning to surface as investigators uncovered that the order was never just one man's decision, and that entire channels of command had erased files, altered timestamps, and buried communications before the first news report ever aired. And as Hegseth sat in silence, awaiting further judgment, powerful figures who had once stood beside him began quietly shifting blame while destroying evidence to protect themselves. And in another twist of dramatic irony, the same whistleblower who exposed the footage started receiving threats and noticed strange cars outside his home every night, realizing he was no longer fighting for truth, but for his life. And just when he thought he was done, he opened a classified archive file that had been scheduled for deletion and found one last transmission that wasn't supposed to exist. A transmission that proved the strike was planned weeks in advance and approved by someone far higher than anyone had ever suspected. And as he stared at the screen with shaking hands, the final words of the message burned into his eyes, forcing him to whisper a single question into the darkness. If Hegseth wasn't acting alone, then who was really pulling the strings? The room felt colder as the whistleblower stared at the recovered transmission, because the name attached to the approval wasn't just a senior officer, but someone with direct access to the highest levels of power, someone who had shaken hands on global stages and spoken about peace while signing off on silent deaths. And as investigators followed the trail, they realized this was never about one strike or one man, but a blueprint that had been quietly tested before in other oceans, other operations, other bodies lost without names. While in public, Pete Hegseth was portrayed as the architect of the crime. The true architects watched safely from behind layers of authority, and in a cruel twist of dramatic irony, the world celebrated what it believed was justice, while the real machinery behind the crimes remained untouched. And just as a secret task force finally uncovered a hidden chain of orders linking the strike to a shadow committee that officially did not exist. The whistleblower disappeared, his phone abandoned, his apartment door left open, and the last thing found on his encrypted drive was a single unfinished message addressed to the world that ended mid-sentence with the terrifying words, "They know about the file and they are coming for." The disappearance of the whistleblower shattered the illusion that this was ever just a courtroom story, because now the truth itself had become a target, and behind-the-scenes files were quietly erased. Surveillance cameras glitched at impossible moments, and official records began to contradict what investigators had already confirmed, while news outlets slowly stopped covering the story and replaced it with safer headlines, as if the world was being gently pushed to forget. And in a cruel turn of dramatic irony, Pete Hegseth was no longer the most powerful man in the story, but the most convenient one to blame, while the real architects tightened their control from behind curtains of classified authority, and when a secret backup drive was finally recovered from the whistleblower's abandoned apartment. It revealed not answers, but something far more dangerous. A list of names that included judges, military leaders, corporate donors, and intelligence officials who were all quietly connected to the strike, and the episode ends with one final chilling moment as the screen fades to black and a distorted emergency broadcast audio plays for just 2 seconds, a voice barely audible, whispering, "You were never supposed to see this," leaving the audience frozen with one question burning in their minds: if the list is real, how deep does this really go? The world changed the moment the list leaked, because names once spoken with respect suddenly felt dangerous to say out loud, and entire careers collapsed in silence as powerful figures disappeared from public view, claiming illness, retirement, or personal reasons. While investigators followed digital trails that revealed private meetings, offshore accounts, and secret briefings that proved the strike was not an isolated decision, but part of a larger system designed to eliminate problems quietly and in a sharp twist of dramatic irony, Pete Hegseth, once framed as the mastermind, began to look like a pawn in a far bigger game as documents showed he had been pressured, guided, and in some moments threatened into compliance. And just when it seemed the truth was finally taking shape, a new classified order appeared in the data, one that wasn't about the past, but about the present. An active directive with a target name that stunned everyone who saw it, because the name wasn't a criminal, a foreign threat, or a trafficker. It was the name of the lead investigator himself. The investigator realized too late that the walls were closing in as strange vehicles followed him home. His phone stopped working without warning, and his secure office was suddenly wiped clean of every file connected to the case, while the world outside believed the story was fading. The real danger was just beginning behind closed doors, and in a devastating moment, he accessed a hidden government channel and found a live countdown timer attached to his own name and photo with the word "neutralize" stamped across the file. And as panic set in, he made one final decision to release everything he had in real time to the world, knowing it might be the last thing he ever did. But just as his finger hovered over the upload command, the power in the room went out. His screen went black, and the last sound recorded was the soft click of a door unlocking behind him, leaving the audience with the terrifying realization that the hunter had finally become the hunted.